In this video, we're going to be going over the snapping tools inside of Modo. The snapping tool is located right here. You can either click on it, you can see it turns orange to see that it's enabled, or you can hit the X key to turn it on and off. Once it's enabled though, you're going to want to be able to snap to certain elements. So to bring this up, you can either hold the Alt key, you can see the snapping turns to options, and you can left click on that and just tear this away, and now we have access to this. Alternatively, if snapping is on, select a polygon, activate a tool. It can be any tool, so we just activated the Move tool. Over here, you see this little snapping section. So again, if I turn snapping off, you can see that it disappears. Turn snapping back on, and it's available. Right there in light gray, the hotkey for it is F11 if you ever want to bring it up. Or again, just like holding Alt and tapping on the snapping button up here, we can just hit the snapping button right here. And then again, we're going to want to play with this menu. So let's drag this over here. So we kind of dock it, leave it up. So now we can have access to our snapping tools. So with snapping enabled, let's go ahead and move this box. So as soon as I left click and drag, there's potentially some UI things that you're noticing. And then as I get close to the box, we'll notice that sometimes it kind of snaps in a weird way, sometimes it doesn't. It just feels kind of weird if you really don't know what's going on. So let's take a look at this. So as soon as we left click and drag, you can see wherever our cursor is at, you can see a little kind of pink crosshair. And what that's doing is it's telling us, one, that snapping mode is on, and two, it's kind of looking for something to snap to. So let's go ahead and undo that. Let's turn snapping off, Move tool, now left click and drag. And now as I move my cursor left and right, that little crosshair isn't there anymore. Let's turn snapping back on, select our box, turn on the Move tool. So if we look over here, the mode is set to global, presets default. This little guy right here, we're not going to worry about the bottom right now, but this little guy vertex is turned on. So now if I left click and drag and I start moving over, as soon as I touch an edge, nothing happens. As soon as I touch a face, nothing happens. But as soon as I hover over a vertice, oh, you'll see that just snapped. So what it's trying to do is it's trying to find a vertice to snap to. So right now, if we look back, our little move widget, right in the center, you can see this little cyan cross. So it's basing what it's snapping to based on kind of the center of our object. So I'm not letting it move up and down on the y-axis. I'm not letting it move forward or backward on the z-axis. I'm just letting it move left and right. So as soon as I move it left and I hover over this little vert down here, it'll snap to where it pretty much, if I look at this from the front view, it's snapping to this vertice, but it's only allowing it to move left and right on the x-axis. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these other options. So let's turn off vertice and let's turn on edge. Again, we're just using our left handle, grab, move. As soon as it snaps, it'll snap to this edge. You can see that it's kind of highlighted in yellow. And as I kind of move up and down, you can kind of see that little blue dot that's on there. It's telling me that's what it snapped to. So I move up here, now it snaps to this edge. Move over here, it snaps to this edge. So we're not really seeing that big of a difference as it snaps between these edges, because they're all on the, go to the front view, on the x-axis, they're all in line. So they're all snapping to the same thing. So let's go back to vertice mode, go to edge mode, and now select our box again. So now instead of using the blue box, I'm going to use this green one. So this one, obviously nothing is really happening because it can't snap up. There's really nothing, if you see my little pink cursor, there's nothing up here to snap to, there's nothing down here to snap to. So it just kind of moves up and down on this axis. If I was to move it over here, it can now snap to these vertices. So if I go ahead and look at this, do a little cross section, what it did was its height snapped to this vertice. So again, if I line this over here, you can see that this little edge right here is lined up with this edge now. So let's hit undo a few times, get back to our original set. So same thing if I was to do front and back, it's not going to do anything until I hover over a certain portion, and then it'll kind of snap to those areas. So again, realistically not very useful, that method of snapping. I mean, it could be, but realistically that's just me showing you how the tool works. So let's go ahead and find some ways to use this to our benefit. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, if I hover over a vertex at this point, again snapping to vertex is turned on, you can see that I get a little blue vertex. The vertex is effectively highlighted in blue. Let's go to edge. You can actually have vertex and edge at the same time. Now when I hover over edge, it's going to turn blue, or if I hover over a vertex, it's going to be blue. We can do the same thing with a polygon. Now when I hover over a polygon, it's going to turn blue. And what that, let's make it toward just vertexes on. So what that's telling me is I could snap my move widget to one of these vertices. So let's go ahead and hover over this. So this guy, this vertex highlights, and I'm going to right click. So now my move widget has been snapped to this corner. Now if I go ahead, left click and move this over, it snaps and it behaves a little bit more how we would want it to behave. Now these two cubes are snapped right together. So think like Minecraft, this cube right next to this cube. So we don't have to actually limit our movement to one axis. We can kind of use all three. So what I'm going to do is hover over this vertex, right click, and now instead of clicking on a single axis or one of these kind of dual axes, I'm going to actually click on this little center cyan plus, and now when I move it, I can actually snap this to any vert that I want to make whatever shape I want. So I can copy paste, move, snap, move this over here, snap to this one, now snap it right here, copy paste, activate move, probably grab the right vertex, but really quickly I can snap these in a way that makes a little bit more sense. So again, if this, in this case, if I wanted to do edges, again, I could leave vertex on, but just for simplicity's sake, we'll turn it off. So let's do copy paste, move, we'll select this little edge right here, because now I can hit up arrow and it snaps. You can see my little crosshair went to that one, snaps to that one. Now I have kind of this shape. So you can kind of see how this works. I can snap to polygons, I can snap to edges, I can snap to verts. It just depends on kind of what I hover over. It'll turn cyan. At that point, I can click and drag, kind of snap this wherever I see fit. Let's go back to our original two boxes. So that's kind of the component mode of snapping, but let's look at a new way of snapping. So this right here, I have this little checkbox called grid. So let's turn that off. Let's turn edge snapping off. So you'll notice as soon as I turn this on and I activate something like the move tool, what's going to happen is over here, I can turn this off, turn this on. Now that the move tool is active, this is turning on and off, is this little grid snap area. So realistically, I have the grid visibly turned off. So I'm going to hold Control and 1, hover over this, toggle grid workspace or work plane, and then that grid comes up. So at this point, without changing any settings, I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag and move this, and you can see that it is kind of moving and snapping in little increments. And if I was to zoom in and look at this more, you can see that it would be snapping to portions of this grid. So let's go up a little bit higher so you can see how it's snapping to the kind of the corners of the grid. It might be easier if I look at this from the top. So again, it's not snapping to the center of the grid, it's snapping to these points. So I can left click and drag, and it's snapping in those little set intervals. But if I zoom out, you can see that the grid is actively changing. So now it's snapping farther. The only way that I can keep it consistent is if I have my camera at a set kind of distance from the object. My grid will dynamically scale, and then it'll snap by that amount. So let's say that we want to kind of control this snapping, and let's say I zoom out and I still want it to go a set distance. So to do that, over here you have this used fixed grid size. I can set this manually. So let's say I want to set this to 1 meter. Hit enter. You can see that grid updates. Set it to 2 meters. So now what's going to happen is it doesn't matter how much I zoom in and how little or big these little grid lines get. it's going to be snapping the distance that I want it to. So again, 1 meter, well, it's a 1 meter by 1 meter cube. This was the center of the scene. I moved this one left 1 meter, I moved this one right 1 meter. So there's kind of a 1 meter gap between the two. So as soon as I move this over, it appears like it snaps to this cube, but realistically it was just 1 meter apart. But I can move this back 1, 2, 3, and you can notice that my mouse movement is a little bit greater than, you can see I'm kind of farther ahead than the cube is, and that's just how the snapping function works. Shouldn't really be a big deal, but regardless, it doesn't matter if I zoom out really far, it's gonna snap 1 meter at a time. So again, with this grid mode on, I can kind of determine what that snapping amount is here by using that fixed grid. Again, really, really useful. Let's reset to the default settings. Let's change our view back. Actually turn this grid off, we're not going to be using that. So this next thing that I want to look at is this little thing right here. We have inner range in pixels and outer range in pixels. So again, in this case, Modo kind of knows what your screen resolution is, so it knows that kind of the distance potentially between here and here is depending on your resolution, let's say, I don't know, 200 pixels. So that's kind of the distance your cursor is away from the point that you want to snap to. So right now we have it set to inner range 24, outer range 40. Let's go ahead and snap here. Let's start moving closer. So as soon as I get within that 40 range click mark of this vertex, it's going to snap to it. So again, you can see it's about this far away and it snaps. So let's hit undo. Let's go ahead and double this. So instead of 24, we'll do 48, and this one we'll do 80. So now let's do that same movement. Again, this is probably pretty predictable it's going to happen. Plink. Now you can see that I'm twice as far away and I'm actually snapping to this. And the same holds true if I was to set this one to 12 and this one to 20. Now I have to be significantly closer. See how close this is? And then it snaps. So again, that's just one that you can kind of determine how close or far you want it to snap to. We'll kind of set it back to that default. But again, that's one of those things that you kind of feel out. And if you're working on something really, really small, or maybe you have a different screen resolution, you might need to change those numbers. So I thought I'd kind of go over those real quick. So some of these things like pivots, world axis, we're not going to go over in this video. I'm going to keep it relatively short. But the next one I do want to cover is this little guy all the way at the bottom called snap angle. So this should be one that you guys know already. But if I go to the rotate tool and I hold the control key, left click, it's going to snap based off of an angle. That angle is determined right here with the snap angle. So again, if I snap once, over here you can see it's 15, 15 plus 15, click, is 30. So you can kind of see where this is going. I can set this all the way to, say, something huge like 45. Now you can see it's rotating 45 degrees, or I can set it all the way down to something like 1. So again, I have that control, but you can see it's snapping in 1 degree increments. You can again see it raise or lower over here. So again, you can set that to whatever you want. And again, I'll put it back to that default of 15. So again, kind of an edge case. If it's useful or not, it really depends on what you're working on. But again, that snap rotate, just hold control and it'll snap for you with your rotation value. So a quick thing that I wanted to point out that involves snapping, but not this menu, is going to be that some tools have snapping values that aren't controlled with this. So again, let's look at the edge slice tool, for example. And again, that one is going to be under this edit tab right here, edge slice. So again, how this tool works is I click on a vertex or an edge, and then I click on another one, and it's going to slice from here to here. Let's just hit undo real quick, reactivate that tool, left click, let's do this edge, left click again. So now I can left click and I can drag this, but you can see that it's going numbers wise in increments of 0.5. So that's going to be right here, snap value 0.5%. And I can set this to 10%, hit enter. Now as soon as I click to move this, it's going to instantly snap to 40 because that's a multiple of 10. And then it's just going to say your 70, 80, 90, all the way to 100. So again, this snapping doesn't even effectively need to be turned on because again, this tool has its own kind of sub snap value. And again, we can set this to any percentage that we want, but I will throw it back to the default of 0.5. And again, now when I use this, you can see that it's doing a little 0.5 increment. So just be aware that this little menu right here, it has snapping features to it, but it doesn't hold everything that has to do with snapping in it. So let's give a quick little example real quick. For snapping, let's just go ahead and subdivide this. So what we're going to kind of simulate is, let's say that we have two things, maybe they're both unwrapped, and we need to connect this one to this one. So again, there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. The one way would be just to bridge the two together, but again, the bridge tool potentially would screw up our UVs. Maybe we want this to be snapped to this, but they're not really shaped the same, so we can't just grab the whole thing, snap it over, and all of these are kind of snapped on top of each other. Maybe it's a little bit different than that. Maybe we have just a little bit odd of a shape. Oops, grab the whole thing. There we go. So we need to effectively connect these to these. So one way that we can do this is, again, we have snapping with a vertex on. I can grab one vertice, hit W to move it. So left click on this little center guy, and then I can kind of click this to any vertice that I want. So from here I can either drop the move tool, reselect, hit the move tool again, and then snap it up to the next one. Or kind of a handy trick is just hold W, W for move, use my lasso select, let go of W, it brings the move tool back up. Let's see that again. I hold W, it kind of temporarily disables the move tool. Let go of W, and it lets me snap. So again, really quick way of snapping these all in place. So let's undo that real quick. And again, that was just the move tool, so effectively, if I grab this and move it here, and I zoom in on this. So right now, if I grab middle mouse select right here, just notice down here it says you have two vertices selected. These two didn't actually get merged together. So what I could do right now is just do a join average. Again, I just have a hotkey set to it. Or we could go to vertex, join average right here. Or we could use the merge tool. Again, the distance, they're right on top of each other, so I could set the distance to 0. As soon as I hit apply, if they are actually merged, they'll disappear, or they'll be deselected, not disappear. Hit apply, you can see they kind of deselected there. So again, same thing, I can snap these, grab both of them, merge tool, hit apply, and they both disappear because they merged. And again, just to confirm, middle mouse select, down here it says one vertex selected, and when I move the one, you can see that it's all attached. So, undo a few more times. There we go. So just because of that example, I'm going to show you kind of a new tool that you might have not known about. Right here we have the weld tool. So notice that my snapping is turned off. I'm going to left click the weld tool, and it's actually going to automatically turn the snapping on, and it's going to be set to vertex. So with this tool, it kind of does what I just did, but it does it faster. So what I can do is grab this, left click, move over here, and it snaps. Select, now it says one vertex. So what this does, this weld tool, is it kind of takes a vertice and welds it. Oops, make sure I grab a vertice, click, and it welds, click, and it welds. And again, just hit the tab key or this guy, C1 vertex, to just confirm that yes, it is welded together. So again, that's another kind of cool tool that it actually turns on the snap tool for you as soon as you activate the tool. And again, when I deactivate the tool, it actually remembered that snapping was turned off, so it turns it off for us. Whereas if I have snapping on, weld tool, it leaves it on, turn the weld tool off, it actually remembers that state and keeps snapping on for us. So with the default settings, the next thing I want to show is just kind of a cool thing. We'll just copy paste, slide this over. Let's just go back to our normal boxes. And we'll just fill in this hole and this hole. There we go. So if I cut new mesh paste, right now we have a active mesh, which is this guy, inactive mesh, which is this guy. By default, the inactive mesh is going to be wireframe. If I was to hit the O key or hit this little gear up here, either or, I can go to inactive mesh, and there's a bunch of properties here I could do, make inactive mesh same as the other one, but realistically I just want to leave this to the default so we can kind of tell these two apart a little bit better. So what I can do is actually grab this and snap this vertex to the inactive mesh. So this can potentially come in handy depending on what you're working on. Let's say that you have two shapes that are fairly similar, but not all the way there. Maybe they're both unwrapped and they're already textured, and you want the one shape to match the other one. So what you can do is just kind of roughly move this into place. And now instead of using that drag weld tool, because I don't want to actually weld anything and connect anything together, I'm going to have this active mesh turn into the inactive one effectively. So now I can just kind of one at a time move all these vertices right into place. So again, with cubes it's a little bit boring, and again, if it was a more complicated shape, it would realistically take a really long time to do this because you have to move them one vert at a time. But just know that that's kind of an option. Another thing you can do if you had to do this for whatever reason, and you needed to speed this process up, instead of hitting the W key, moving over, what you could do is under deform, you have this little guy right here, element move, hotkey is T, so let's click on him. And how element move works is whatever element of the 3D mesh you hover over, so be it a vertex, an edge, or a polygon, it's going to turn that cyan color. So face cyan, edge cyan might be a little hard to see, or a vertex cyan. And what it lets you do is click and drag and move that piece. So again, element move, snapping is turned on, we're snapping to vertices. So click, click. So again, this way, a lot faster, if we can click on the right thing, a lot faster than selecting these vertices one at a time. And again, now we have cube A sitting on top of cube B, and they're the exact same size. So for this next demonstration, what I'm going to do is I need to give both of these cubes unwrapped. So I'm going to actually have my top mesh selected, hold shift, click the bottom one. So now kind of both meshes are active meshes. I'm just going to give these a quick unwrap. Something like that. Let's go to the UV tab. And again, it was a created box what had an initial unwrap, but I had kind of messed it up a little bit. So unwrap, right click. So now we have our two unwraps. So the snapping will actually work inside of the UV viewport too. So again, let's say that I had these two boxes. They were placed in a magical way that was complicated for me to reduplicate in a sense. So what I could do is I could effectively kind of move these in place so they're really, really close. And then what I could do is, let's see, element move, click, snap, click, snap. So again, I have to do this to every single vertex. So again, not the most efficient way of doing it, but sometimes, and again with all these examples, there's usually a weird edge case where you might need to have something fit and snap to something else. So just know that that snapping tool works right inside of the UV editor as well. It might even be something as simple as I just have this one polygon that I need to kind of put into place. So again, just knowing that I can snap those can be fairly helpful. So hopefully this video helped you with understanding the basics of the snapping tools inside of Modo.